Chapter 394, Submarine Tourism. Wednesday, October 16, 1996. Salix Salacia Atlantis DEFCON status 4/1. 1%. Edwin Mueller looked around the park at the edge of the lake. Preeta, this is amazing. How long did it take you to build this? Preeta Sandor smiled. It took a matter of months, and that was it. Remember that we have magic at our disposal down here. Is this a natural lake, or did you construct it? Believe it or not, it's natural. It empties into the Southern Ocean through a river on the other side of the city. Merpeople brave enough to swim through the cold waters down here can actually come and visit us through that channel. Poole whistled. Interesting. You've got a way for vessels from the outside to reach your nation. In theory, yes. In practice, however, most of the river is under the ice, so I don't see how well Muggle ships can make it over here. Maybe if they knew how to travel underwater. Mueller cut back in. Preeta, we do have underwater vessels. They're called submarines, and a couple of them are protecting Atlantis at all times now. You know, sir, a place like this could become a prime Muggle tourist destination if that channel is wide enough to admit submarines. Sandor grimaced momentarily, but his face soon cleared up. Perhaps. However, keep in mind that we aren't accustomed to dealing with outsiders. Many of us will be scared, especially if the submarine comes from a Western nation. The Chinese man looked over at the waterfront a few hundred feet away, where several of the locals were eyeing them warily. That's another thing I don't get. Why exactly do you guys fear people from the West? Our country was founded by people fleeing anti-wizard colonial policies, Mr. Chang. This part of the world was relatively unknown to the Europeans, but not to the merpeople. They told us about this lake and helped us settle down here. There was a distinct pause, and finally Leonard spoke. Preeta, I come from Australia, a nation which was once part of the British colonial empire. I can tell you that times have changed. If you took a look at a modern world map, the empires have all disappeared, and the colonies have gained independence for the most part. You have nothing to fear anymore. If anything, we Muggles will marvel at what you have done down here. You have managed to settle where people like us couldn't have dreamed. Zhukov grinned. If you want monetary compensation for what your oppressors did to you, you can always have them come down here in their submarines and pay to visit. This would also open up trade with the outside world. You'd never know when Muggle technology would come in handy. A new voice cut in, and Mueller turned as the foreign minister headed in their direction. That may not be a bad idea. However, we'll have to think about it. We don't want to push things too fast down here. Zhukov continued. There's another alternative. You can leave this underground city and return to the lands you came from as the colonial threat is gone. You probably wouldn't mind feeling the sun on your face without the ice in the way. Indeed, we wouldn't mind feeling the sun directly. Sometimes we take the form of penguins and go exploring on the peninsula, but that's as far as we can go. As far as the relocation goes, the simple fact is we've all grown up here. This is our home now, and none of the people who originally emigrated here are still alive. Mueller nodded and looked back at the lake. Are there any native life forms in the lake or in the area surrounding the city? The Preeta nodded. Indeed, there are fish in the lake unique to this area. The area surrounding the lake, however, is artificial and does not have any native life forms. Are you thinking of examining these creatures? Mueller nodded vigorously. Absolutely. We are scientists, and these animals have been isolated from the outside world for millions of years. Sorek bit his lip. We'll see what we can do to set up a naturalist expedition. Keep in mind, however, that the endemic creatures are not very common anymore. When we brought our fish in to feed ourselves, the researchers swore in unison, and Mueller let it out. Let me guess. Your fish ate everything in here because they had no predators, and the fish here weren't expecting to become prey. The Preeta blinked. Why, that is exactly what happened. I'm impressed, sir. You must be very smart. There are a few local species left in niches here and there, however. We've taken some care to make sure they don't die out, as we've managed to extract some interesting spell components and herbal remedies from them. Mueller breathed a sigh of relief. That was a wise move, Preeter. I'd recommend putting some kind of barrier in the lake and confining your fish to one side of it, the one nearest the town. That way, you won't have to look as far for your food, and the native species will be able to come back. Preeter looked at the lake thoughtfully. That might not be a bad idea. I'll bring it up at the next Senate meeting. That should be next Fire Day. Zhukov frowned. Fire Day. The foreign minister smiled. We have an unusual calendar down here, with the seasons and constellations all in disarray because of our proximity to the pole and our belief in the 5 gods of magic. We've developed a calendar which consists of 73 5-day weeks, where each of the days is named after a different god. Every 4 years there's a special holiday dedicated to all 5 gods, which occurs at the end of the year. Mueller did the math in his head and turned to the rest of the researchers. Heh, 73 asterisk 5 equals 365. It sounds like they've developed something based on the Julian calendar with 5-day weeks. I wonder. He turned back to the Preetor. Do you ever find the equinoxes and such getting out of whack with the beginning of the year? The foreign minister nodded. It's gotten off by a few days. However, it's pretty close. You can do better. Everyone nodded in unison. Indeed, Preetor, we can. Let us tell you about it. The foreign minister listened attentively as the researchers explained the Gregorian calendar. Once the presentation was done, he nodded. Very interesting. I'll bring this up with the Senate as well. The Preetor then brought out a bottle of green liquid, which Mueller looked at warily. Pouring it into glasses, Sandor gestured to the bottle. Do you drink alcohol or wine in your culture? This is a bottle of fine wine from the land of Círdan. Only highly ranking Muggles are allowed to drink it. Mueller looked at the rest of the Muggles, who were as baffled as he was. Círdan, where is that? Is that somewhere else under the ice cap? No, sir. It's in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and I would expect that your world already knows about it by now, since it is almost certainly going to be on the map which exposed us. You did know about it, right, Hogsmeade? Professor Flitwick looked at Dumbledore. The man had survived, but he seemed to have lost a lot of his memories, and his speech was somewhat slurred. Flitwick had handed over the former headmaster's pensive, hoping that it would fill in some of the blanks. Flitwick watched as Moody brought Dumbledore up to speed. That's about it, Albus. You went down, and the Death Eater stole the Elder Wand and killed Severus when he came to investigate. He cast the Dark Mark with the Elder Wand, and the supercharged spell brought the snake to life. It attacked the people on the astronomy tower, killing Sinistra and many Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff Newt students. 2 famous Muggle scientists, Professors Moore and Hawking, have taken over for Sinistra. Hawking was actually very sick at the time we got to him, but Madame Pomfrey was able to cure him to the point where he can now walk with a cane. Dumbledore nodded. That's good news. However, I am a bit disturbed by the fact you believe the Death Eaters are after the Deathly Hallows so that they can bring back Voldemort. That would explain their attack upon me, of course. I take it Nicholas has given the Resurrection Stone to Atlantis. Moody nodded. He has done so, Albus. I highly doubt the Death Eaters would be stupid enough to actually try to get into Atlantis, particularly since an international manhunt is underway for the Zygonovs. That takes care of the second Hallow. However, there is something urgent I need to tell you. Would you agree that we need to keep the third Hallow out of the Death Eaters' hands as well, especially if they don't realize the Resurrection Stone is out of play? Flitwick nodded. I agree. You know where it is. I believe I do. And trust me, Phileas, you're not going to believe it. Moody grunted. Considering what's happened over the past 9 months, I'll buy anything. All right, Albus. Where is it? Dumbledore told them, and there was a long pause. Finally, Moody burst out swearing. Is there anything that kid is not involved with? 20 miles south of Belair, Gorobieski District Saka, Republic Russian Federation. The mucksun was a fine specimen of its kind, silvery, fusiform, half a meter long. Soon, it would travel upriver to find a suitable stream for spawning, but now it was lazily swimming through the clear, sunlit waters of the river, looking for smaller fish, insects, or crabs. The prey never stood a chance. Faster than it could flinch, it was impaled by a wicked, serrated knife, tightly fixed to a straight tree branch to create a makeshift spear and hauled out of the water. Sebastian Orlov neatly decapitated the trashing fish with another knife, uttered a praise to the black guard, and started gutting it. Looking up at the setting sun, he decided to call it a day and set up camp as soon as he found a good place. He had been wandering in this wilderness since Friday. He salvaged what he could and dared from the empty safe house where the Portkey deposited him, but sometimes he felt he hadn't given himself enough time for that. Sure, it was only a matter of time until the enemy noticed his escape, and they would send trackers after him. But even if it was only the middle of autumn according to the calendar, he felt the gathering cold already and knew that winter is coming. He didn't recognize any prominent landmarks, but the stars, plants, and climate told him he's somewhere in the Russian Far East. He found the river the day before yesterday and followed it down ever since, knowing that following it would probably lead him to civilization, but would certainly lead him north. He had to find a settlement, and soon. The food he could take was good for a week, two if he asked sparingly, and he could fish now that he found the river. But the trees have already shed their leaves, and there were no berries left to gather. He salvaged a good tent, a warm bedroll, and a backpack, but he wasn't so lucky when it came to clothing or weapons. There were none of the latter, and judging by the safe house's wardrobe, none of Mab's minions were human males, a fact that limited his looted clothing to a gaudy and ill-fitting fur cloak and other items even more obviously belonging to females with twisted sense of taste. How in T. Chernobog's name will he walk into a village dressed like that? His musings were interrupted by the distant roar of an old engine. Straining his ears, he heard it approaching from the south. Then he saw a faint, barely visible light filtering through the trees. Then the roar stopped. By then, he identified it as an old pickup truck, one of the crude but durable designs from the late USSR, about a mile away. Not wanting to miss the opportunity, he grabbed his katana and started moving towards the source of light as fast and as silently as he could. Abram Yakov took another swing of his bottle of vodka. He stopped to empty his bladder maybe 10 minutes ago, but to his irritation, he found himself unable to relieve himself, no thanks to old age. He came to these parts as a hunter and trapper, gathering furs in the summer, selling them and drinking booze in the winter. This year's catch was good enough for a happy winter in Yakutsk, a thought that should have made him relaxed enough. Well, perhaps with a little more alcohol. He put the bottle away and started whistling a tune when he felt a slight prodding on his back and heard a cold voice say, "Don't move. Slowly, lift your hands up where I see them and turn around." Obeying in silent terror, Abram turned and saw the weirdest man he'd ever seen, holding some Japanese sword at his throat. He was dressed in a strange, fashioned, gaudy fur cloak, obviously meant for ladies and quite expensive. Strangely, he couldn't identify the fur, but saw that it was intact despite twigs stuck to it. Apart from that, the man wore rags feet to neck. He didn't even have a decent pair of shoes. His face and hands were full of scars, visible even in the faint light of the bike's headlights. The stranger spoke again, black light in the darkness, as if he waited for him to finish it. Seeing that the hunter won't know the reply phrase, the cultist said, "I need your boots, your clothes, and your pickup truck." Abram stared at him in wry amusement, then began to softly chuckle. "I guess you always wanted to say that line. I've seen that movie, son. I'm not gonna fall for that. But listen to me. We could work out a compromise. I need my boot and clothes, and my pickup above all that carries all my catch this year, but I think you're not specifically after those. What you need is a ride out of here and back to civilization, and maybe someone who can help selling that cloak of you. You know, it looks quite expensive to me. I dare say it'd sell for more than what I made this summer. So how about I give you a ride to town, help you sell that stuff, and buy decent clothing, and you forget that leaving me naked in the middle of nowhere part. Swiftly sidestepping and taking the man's gun from its holster, Sebastian replied, "Deal. Follow me to my camp. I've some stuff to pick up." To his surprise, the hunter just stood there when he started out. As the cultist raised his eyebrows questioningly, the hunter shrugged and said, "One more thing, man. Could you please whistle something?" Chapter 395, Undesirable 1 and 2. Friday, October 18, 1996, Atlantis, DEFCON status. Haydar Dagher took the document from the Russian Minister of Magic. It showed a man and a woman in their 30s. The woman had brown shoulder-length hair, and the man was balding with a salt and pepper beard. They should be easy enough to find, assuming they weren't using the polyjuice potion again. He whistled. "So those are the Zyganovs. You think they've left Ukraine?" The Russian nodded. "Yes, sir. We've staked out their house for a while, and we've seen no activity there. Could they be somewhere else in your area?" "It's possible, sir. After all, Ukraine is a large nation, let alone Russia itself. There's a whole section of Siberia which isn't patrolled very often because people, well, generally don't go there. I'm organizing an expedition to start searching these remote areas. Keep in mind, however, that given the sheer size of the target area and the wizard's access to polyjuice, the odds of finding them are low." "How about England? Could they have gone back to England again?" "Perhaps. Flamel is looking for them over there as we speak. So far, nothing." Dagger put the document with the Zyganov's pictures on his desk. "Keep me posted, my friend. I'll start warning my men over here, and they'll start broadcasting the alert all around the globe. We'll catch them. Don't worry. Any news on Rasputin?" "Nothing yet, sir. If he's out there, he's being very careful. He knows what happened to Voldemort. We're going to issue a bulletin for him as well. I know you can't get involved yet as it's not international, and let's hope it stays that way. How's the situation in Silesia?" "I've heard Cyril just came out to a bunch of Aussies and Antarctic researchers." "Indeed they have, Victor. So far, they seem to be cautiously optimistic that contact will work, though there's a lot of distrust. Both sides have been learning from each other, and I've even been told that the Muggles have introduced them to the Gregorian calendar. They've still been using a Julian one with 5-day weeks." The Russian smiled. "It's about time they did that. My parents told me about the confusion when they switched over in Russia, and I still can't figure out when my birthday is half the time. What's going on with Círdan?" "I've heard rumors that the common Muggles in the United States have found out about Círdan. We know President Clinton already knew about the Círdani and kept them a state secret due to the fact that Nation wasn't out. Has Círdan come out?" Dagger frowned. "No, and that's what worries me. Círdan is in absolute chaos right now. The freed Muggles are begging and stealing for their food. Half of the men have been lured to Nestor, and some of the opportunistic wizards are trying to take advantage of the situation by playing off the disgruntled Muggles. The tractors are breaking down every so often, and there aren't many people who know how to fix them. To top that off, there's still lingering resentment about the United States for forcing them to change their way of life. The wizards are frightened of further American interference, and the Muggles are finding it harder and harder to get by. The priests are not sure what to do with all the polygamy. It's an absolute mess. And yes, you are correct in that the Muggles in the United States are starting to find out. At the very least, the Silesian Council blurted it out thinking that Círdan had already been exposed by the Xyland map, which had exposed Silesia. Realistically, though, once that map came out, it was only a matter of time. I doubt Cyril's restraint would have bought Círdan more than a couple of weeks. Remember, Nestor has come out, and there are likely lots of ex-Yahoos who want to rat on their former masters through Nestor. Do the Muggles realize the Círdani used to enslave the Muggles? Unfortunately, I think so. The stories coming out of Enfield are claiming that the 9-year-old girl who'd escaped on the oil tanker is learning English and is starting to talk. You forget how quickly young children can learn new languages. She's got the ability to speak, but doesn't have the restraint or maturity yet to keep things to herself. That's a dangerous combination, especially now that she's spending a lot of time in a Muggle school without her parents to keep her in check. The Russian grimaced. I agree. And if the Ciudadani find out that the general American populace knows about them and is almost certainly going to tell the rest of the world. Dagher gritted his teeth. There's going to be hell to pay, Victor. I have a very bad feeling about this. It could very well be that the state of Círdan may not be long for this world. Remember what happened to Howie and Homeland. There's only one thing we can hope for. The United States realizes that any attack on Círdan will almost certainly justify Salasia's prejudices and give Círdan a possible ally. We can only hope this conflict doesn't widen, particularly since the US is a member of NATO. The Russian's eyes widened. God help us. America and Nestor vs Círdan and Salasia with a possible escalation to get NATO involved, that we definitely do not want. Chancellor's Executive Chamber Círdan, Sayatnan looked Vixar in horror. What? Are you sure about this? Vixar nodded slowly. There are multiple reports stating that we exist making out into the general Muggle community. One of Altry's missing Yahoos has started talking in the United States, and we can rest assured that there are Yahoos talking to people in Nestor, which is already out. To make matters worse, Salasia exposed us during their first contact, thinking that we were already out or about to come out. The three chancellors look at each other. Finally, Ortelu summarized the situation in one word. Shit. She continued. It's a moot point right now. We're going to have to come out and do it fast. First impressions are very important, and as a result, we need to broadcast our side of the story before that kid tells us what she believes to be the truth. Sayatnan shook her head. But we've made some reforms already and given the Yahoos more freedom. Yes, but remember that this little girl, and very likely her parents, don't know that. They're American Muggles now for all practical purposes. Besides, it's not like freeing the Yahoos helped solve our problems. If anything, it made it worse. Those Yahoos don't know how to think for themselves. They can't fix the tractors, and so forth. In effect, emancipation has just given our country a 53% unemployment rate and an insane gender imbalance. Is the United States going to attack us? I sure hope not. We've certainly made changes after all. Hopefully the US will help clean a lot of this stuff up. You have to understand that a similar situation happened in the United States back in the 19th century. One part of the country had slaves while the other didn't. This distinction was used as a casus belli for a civil war when many of the southern states broke off to form their own nation. The war lasted 4 years, and the northern side won. The nation was reunited, and slavery was abolished in the South, and according to Ariadne, the United States had the same problems we currently have for a while. It took a lot of hard work to clean that up. Most of it was imposed by the winning side. Let's hope we have the time. Vixar grunted. Does this mean that the half of the United States will support us and half will support the Yahoos? Unlikely, Vixar. Remember, they're all potential slaves from our perspective, and that the side which was against slavery won. Judging from Clinton's reaction, the nation may very well find itself compelled to squelch slavery wherever it goes. That would be bad. At any rate, here's what we'll do. We'll issue a report this afternoon and broadcast it to the US and other nations. We'll spin it in a way which focuses on our reforms. Something along the lines of we have reformed our government to make it more democratic and believe we are ready to come out to the world. Further reforms will still be coming, and the country is in a state of flux. Advice would be appreciated, and people who wish to contact us should speak with their Minister of Magic. What do you think? The other two chancellors looked at each other. Finally, both women nodded. I don't like it much, but I agree with you. We have no choice, and we need to announce ourselves before any of the Senoltri do it for us. Let's start talking with the speechwriters. We need to get this done today." Vixar nodded. "Agreed. Besides, as long as the Protector is still up, they can't really do anything to us without our permission." Chapter 396. Does this wanted poster make me look fat? Friday, October 18, 1996. Kohat/Zyganov Residency Atlantis DEFCON status 4/1. 3% Genya Zyganov was getting accustomed to life in Atlantis. As far as he could tell, everyone had seemed to have been convinced that they were in fact the Kohat family. They seemed to have escaped without any problems. However, as a precaution, they had disguised themselves in case people caught them without the invisibility cloak or the polyjuice potion. He had shaved off his beard and drunk an experimental potion which supposedly regrew some of his hair. It gave him acne, but he figured he could live with that. His wife had dyed her hair blonde, which she had been thinking of doing for years, and cut it almost short enough to look good on a man. It was hard for him to spend most of his time indoors, and in the few times he went outside for him not to use magic. Helena had done it for a long time, however, and she had come out fine. She had given him some pointers: put your wand in your pants leg or somewhere like that where it wasn't as easy to reach, and those seemed to be working. But for how long? His musing was interrupted by an owl which flew in their window with a document in its talons. The bird was accompanied part of a large flock, which seemed to delivering similar letters to all of the people in the area. Since he had chosen to live in a Muggle area, it was probably more instructions to get the Muggles accustomed to their new lives. He unrolled the document and began to read it. His eyes widened as soon as he saw the two pictures at the top of the page: urgent security, announcement international terrorist, on the loose 250,000 galleon reward for her capture. The International Confederation of Warlocks, in conjunction with the British and Russian Ministers of Magic, has just issued a reward for information leading to the capture of a Ukrainian witch, Halina Wasilievna Zyganova. The British Ministry of Magic has evidence which ties Mrs. Zyganova to the recent Death Eater terror attack at the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Like all of the servants of the late Voldemort, she is to be considered armed and dangerous. If you see her, do not try to apprehend her. Call the Auras and they will deal with her. As you can see from the photographs below, Mrs. Zyganova is in her early 30s. She is about 160 cm in height and has shoulder-length brown hair. She also likely has a Death Eater tattoo, though it is not visible in this image. She likely belongs to a Death Eater cell in Eastern Europe, possibly in the Ukraine. She may be seen in traveling with her husband, Yevgeny Romanovich Zyganov. He is balding and has a black and white beard. We have reason to believe that he is either a Death Eater or sympathetic with the Death Eater's mission of subjugating the Muggles and ridding the world of wizards who are not pureblood. He is about 180 cm in height. Both Zyganovs come from a small town near Lviv, Ukraine. They survived the events of Judgment Day by hiding underground, possibly with the assistance of the polyjuice potion. This draft allows the drinker to temporarily assume the form of another person, allowing escape without being detected. Mrs. Zyganov was detected at Hogwarts by agent with a magical artifact which saw through polyjuice potions. The Iqua has reason to believe that she infiltrated Hogwarts by posing as the Muggle studies teacher and luring Headmaster Dumbledore and Severus Snape out into the Forbidden Forest, where they are attacked by an unknown accomplice. The accomplice cast the dark mark into the sky with spell powerful enough to animate the snake and cause it to attack the castle, killing one more professor and 15 students. If you have any information on either of these people, or you want more details as to how to detect if someone has been polyjuiced, contact your local wizarding official. Thank you for your attention. Zyganov swore and raced downstairs, where he ran into his wife washing dishes. Halina, we've got a problem. We've got to get out of here. Zyganova looked at him surprised. A problem? What do you mean? In response, he just showed her the letter. She read it and began shaking. Dear God, Genya, what do? We can't leave here. If we leave, Rasputin won't have us in place when the Black Fist needs us. I'm aware of that, Helena. However, he also has to realize that if we're dead, we won't be able to help him either. How did they figure it out? She looked over the document once again. It must have been Alastair Moody's eye or that marauder's map I confiscated from that student. Now that I think about it, it was probably the latter. I highly doubt Moody would have let me keep on teaching if he saw through my ruse. I suspect the kid saw me on the map, though I was a new student and didn't pay much attention until the attack took place. Once the investigation began, he recalled seeing my name on the map, and everything went from there. We did catch one break, however. They didn't catch Darina. Zyganov nodded. No, they didn't, and that gives me an idea. Really? What? He brought out their fake ID cards. We get two more people in here, a man and a woman, who continue playing the role of the cohorts. We then shrink ourselves, hide under the invisibility cloak or polyjuice potion, and escape on the boat that brings the new wizards in. Maybe Darina can play the woman's role. We stick their pictures over ours similar to the way we did it with the cohorts. Suddenly, our fake IDs become theirs. But won't people wonder where we went? Probably, Helena. However, I suspect that if the new agents say they're friends of the cohorts, or better, yet they're Muggle-born wizarding children, and the cohorts bought a house for them, we may be able to get away with this. And if all else fails, they can polyjuice into us. Revelation Party headquarters. Judith Rogers looked at the America for Humans members and pointed at the map. That, ladies and gentlemen, is Howiehamland, a place where wizards have been engaged in battle despite the eyes said oaths. Combine that with the fact that it is possible to preemptively renounce oaths with religious formulas, and you can see how the wizards are unable to police themselves. To make matters worse, the Death Eaters have regrouped and are attacking children in England. Her voice reached a crescendo. Ladies and gentlemen, it is obvious that the wizards are not keeping up their end of the bargain when it came to the truce America for Humans had with them. As of this moment, the truce is null and void. As of now, it is once again open season on wizards. I will advocate increased pressure on wizards to behave while you guys start planning attacks. If the wizards don't shape up in a hurry, it's showtime. Britain for Humans has already said they plan to resume attacks. We don't want to let them have all the fun, do we now? Nestor, Gabrielle watched in disbelief as the cruise ship pulled up a few hundred feet away from Nestora. It was about the size of a small town. She shuddered to think how many people were on board. A small boat lowered itself over the side, filled rapidly with people, and started heading over to the island. People with Muggle cameras were taking pictures and gawking at all of the women in the welcoming committee. This wasn't mating season anywhere on the island. However, it didn't prevent people from wanting to visit. Judging from the people on the boat, it looked like a 70-30 split between men and women. Many of them were elderly. However, there was a large group of young men whose eyes were roughly the size of acromantulas. Curious what they wanted, she started heading over to check it out. She had barely taken 10 steps before her stomach heaved again and she doubled over. Damn that morning sickness, she thought. Maybe it would be best for her to just stay here. Henriques had written back and agreed that she should keep the baby. She hoped she wouldn't regret that about 8 months from now Hogwarts, Harry Potter glared at Flitwick in Moody. First you people take my map, and then you take my cloak. Flitwick nodded. We have reason to believe the Death Eaters are going after your cloak. I can't say why, though. Suffice it to say that anyone with Dumbledore's wand and your cloak is in a position to obtain great power. Really? Why? And why my cloak in particular? Moody grunted at him. I can't say, Mr. Potter. It's classified. Suffice it to say that your cloak is unusual, and Dumbledore knew about it. Harry frowned. My cloak is unusual. aren't there others? Yes, Mr. Potter. However, yours is unusually powerful and can do strange things when used in conjunction with Dumbledore's wand. Give it to me. Harry winced. Can I at least have my map back? Moody shook his head angrily. We don't have the map, and even if we did have the map, we'd confiscate it and not give it back. Now are you going to give me the cloak, or do you want me to give you a detention? This is for your own safety. Resigned, Harry handed over his invisibility cloak. He was having a very bad day. Chapter 397, Floor Photo Shoot. Saturday, October 19, 1996, Stonehenge, United Kingdom, Atlantis, DEFCON status. 413% next up. Time to invent a spell to correctly spell. T. Chernobog. Fleur Delacroix hadn't realized how much time it took to prepare a model for a photo shoot. She had been in the makeup room for a good 30 minutes already, and they were still trying to mess with her hair. The stage manager had already laid no fewer than 5 costumes on the back seat of the Pegasus, most of which were rather revealing. Those were nothing, however, compared to the requests they had made to have her pose nude. Yes, she would have all private areas covered by monoliths and so forth, and in some cases she'd have her elbows in front of her chest. She had turned those down flat, of course. They had insisted, however, and she eventually agreed to do the nude poses. A few months after the first set had already been taken. B, if the men of Britain agreed that she would make a good model, and C, if no men were present at the nude shot. The plan was to take advantage of the morning sunlight and take several shots of her lounging in the back seat of the car. Her future father-in-law had leapt at the possibility of getting more Pegasus advertisement out of this. They'd then take her over to the monoliths and have a few more with her leaning against them, standing between them, and so forth. The hope was that she would be able to advertise herself as an attractive young woman who was both an accomplished witch and a model. The choice of Stonehenge to serve as the photo shoot made sense in more ways than one. Not only was it traditionally associated with witches and witchcraft, but it supposedly had been built by people the Muggles weren't supposed to have known about. Giants had helped shape and carry over the tremendous rocks several thousand years ago in an attempt to help the ancient Britons create a simple observatory. The Muggle documents explained how hundreds of workers had been needed to carry each stone, a fiction which Fleur was wondering if she should disillusion them of. Construction supposedly began in 2840 BC upon the site of an existing Muggle observatory, which wasn't doing much good. There had been a brief pause of about 20 years immediately after the Hammer of Ra impact in 2807 BC. Other than that, construction had been more or less non-stop, with lots of magical assistance for about 50 years. By the time the site was fully operational in 2760 BC, it had magical turrets made out of wood and extremely sophisticated technology for its time. It had been one of the wonders of the post-impact world. Stonehenge didn't last long, however. In 2531 BC, a war broke out between rival tribes, and one of them decided to use the site as a fortress to defend themselves against a more powerful enemy. Not surprisingly, the besiegers eventually made it in and more or less wrecked and looted the entire structure. All that was left behind were the huge stones which survived to this day. Everything else had been small enough to steal or burn. By the time people returned to the site a few hundred years later, its history as a magical observatory had been completely lost. Fleur winced as she tried on the first swimsuit. How could something this scandalous cost £199? What was that, 40 galleons? There wasn't any material to buy. She found much to her amusement that it propped up certain parts of her body in a most disturbing fashion. She made a mental note to not let them put her in such ridiculous costumes in further shoots, at least until she got herself completely drunk. Doing her best to paste a smile on her face, she stood between two of the pillars as the cameramen turned a Muggle air-moving device called a fan on so her hair could be blown back. In one hand she had a flower, and in the other hand she had a wand. The photographers grinned and started taking pictures with both dynamic and ordinary Muggle cameras. She resisted the urge to strangle the photographers as they told her to look this way, turn that way, put her head on the rock, and so forth. She breathed a sigh of relief as the photographers said she was done. Then they pointed at the next swimsuit, one which seemed even more revealing. Oh, wonderful, she thought Britain for Humans headquarters. Isabel Miller pointed at the long live King Harry sign over her head. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, we are Britons, and we love the monarchy. However, the idea of having a potential wizard in charge of the country gives me a sense of dread. We know William is a good person. However, what are the wizards going to do to him? Are the wizards going to make it so that he is going to be unfit to rule? Will he get the same snobbish arrogance as the rest of the wizards and make muggles like us second-class citizens? Judging from the reaction of the crowd, she wasn't alone in that assessment. She continued, I believe that the country should do one of two things. First, we can have the Regency Committee continue to serve as the de facto rulers even after William attains his majority. Second, we can pressure William to abdicate so that Prince Harry can take the throne. What do you think of that? Their crowd murmured a little. It seemed like was a little more dissent here. Besides, it's not like the king had much real power anymore. On the other hand, the king hadn't been a practicing wizard for God knows how long, if ever. Muslims for Humans headquarters. The head of Muslims for Humans gestured towards the crowd. This is a sign from Allah, fellow Muslims. Allah has hardened the wizards' hearts to the point where they refuse to hold by the eyes said I oaths. What's more, they attack children. Allah will not do everything for us, though. You know how he works. He guides us through his actions the world. Although I do not dare to presume to know how he thinks, his request here is plain to see. America for Humans is planning to restart its campaign against the servants of Satan. Britain for Humans will be doing so as well. Even our traditional enemy, the Crusaders, have joined the party through Christians for Humans, officially known as the Celestine Church. Everyone is acting to overthrow the wizards and their demonic allies. If you need any more proof, just take a look at Howienhamland, where horsemen have spent years subjugating our race. Look at Círdan, where according to recent reports, the wizards have historically treated mundane people like you and me as slaves. The wizard's behavior is an affront to Allah, and it is obvious what must be done. Allah has called you to action and demands that you rectify his world. What say you? The crowd cheered in unison, and Muslims for Humans was back in business. Tokyo. The Interpol agent looked at the Japanese security officer and shrugged. We've looked all over the place, sir, and contacted people from all around the world. There is no radioactive material missing other than promethium. However, all of the promethium appears to have disappeared. There is one anomaly, however. The Japanese man frowned. Oh, what's that? A wizard in the United States used a spell to geminio some more promethium for his lab. This geminio worked, and he now has several kilograms worth of the material. The spell appears to have been cast about the time you, and many other people around the globe, saw your samples disappear from your lab. That's crazy. Are you implying that they stole our stuff? If so, why would they just take that and not other radioactive compounds? We're not sure, sir. However, one of the wizards has an interesting theory which, if true, sheds some light on the way magic works, at least when it comes to geminio and possibly engorgio. Really, what's going on? The Interpol agent looked at his notes. The theory is that geminio works not by duplicating material, but by summoning additional material of that type from locations all over the world. Enough material is summoned to make it look as if more of the substance had been created out of nothing. However, if one were to look very carefully, you will notice that some of the substance has been taken from other places. The security officer nodded slowly. I think I see where you're going. The spell required 5 kilograms of promethium. This element does not occur naturally on Earth, so there wasn't much promethium anywhere nearby. Consequently, it took stuff from further away. Correct, but it goes further than that. According to latest estimates, there are fewer than 600 grams of the metal on the surface of the Earth. This forced the spell to look in outer space as well, which in turn caused it to retrieve material from so far away that the finite speed of light came into play. The metal arrived in several bursts after the first 500 grams or so appeared. The next batch occurred 3 seconds later, which is roughly the amount of time required for light to travel to the moon and back. Atlantis suspects that this batch came from the moon. The next batches came from further away, far enough away that the light travel time was measured in minutes and possibly hours. The security officer whistled. I see. So the summoning spell worked after all, except that it was drawn out by the fact that nothing can travel faster than light. Exactly. What does it mean? It means that physics has another conundrum to deal with. And if we set up the experiment properly, we have discovered a way to get material objects to travel at or near the speed of light. Friday, October 11, 1996, Icicle Sidade Arctic Ocean. What do you mean he escaped? Sabine's shriek reverberated through the white halls of the iceberg fortress. The fairy winced and replied in a small voice. An your villa friend is dead, and the prisoner is not in the cell. Someone must have taken him away to dispose of him. The witch was baffled. Who on earth would want to dispose of a prisoner? He was right where Mab wanted him, enabling her to cross-check any information gained from her new outfit. The Fae shrugged. Tuntun was pretty high in the chain of command. He had many enemies and jealous ones. And you know how it goes. Offing one's superior on the field of battle is called treason. Doing the same in the citadel is called a promotion. He must have been killed by one of our kind. Forcing back an outburst, Sabine told the fairy in a dangerously calm voice, I don't care about your hierarchy. The prisoner is missing. Find him and bring him back alive before I have to tell the queen you screwed up. She won't be happy, the fairy gulped. He could be anywhere. Icicle Citadel is very big. Finding him will take time. Losing the last of her patience, the witch shrieked. Then you better start now. Saturday, October 12, 1996, Icicle Sidade Arctic Ocean. The steady rumble of Lucas's footsteps drowned out the more subtle noises of the corridor, but only when he chose to. This time, for example, he wore armored jackboots and walked with the stereotypical giant gait. But when he donned his deerskin moccasins, he could be frighteningly silent, especially for a 20-foot-tall brute. Well, at least in theory. The truth was, whenever it came to forests, being a giant and being stealthy was invariably mutually exclusive, not that it stopped him from hunting with an oversized crossbow and a small pack of tamed wahilas, but it wasn't the same as walking the woods like a shadow. Purposefully trampling to avoid the pestering of tiny ones, on the other hand, never got old. Unfortunately for the oversized hunter, Keshon did not give up when his voice was drowned out by the thumping of giant feet. It all came to a startled halt when the fairy simply flew up into the giant's ear and whistled sharply. Oh. Why's that for? He was irritated and knew from experience that his mistress didn't particularly care about each and every, accidentally pulped, little winged minion. But the little one's recklessness awakened his curiosity. I need your help, O great hunter, master of direwolves, chimed the fairy. I want a lost person found. Discreetly, the queen doesn't need to know he's not in his cell. Can your wonderful beasts track a day-old trail? A cocky grin spread on the giant's face. Sounds like a challenge. Lead the way, Squishy. 30 minutes later. The fairy and the giant looked at each other in the dim light of the emergency Portkey room. Desperate, the small one cried. Are you sure he didn't double back or something? The hunter shook his head and rumbled. His path is clear from the cell all the way here. He knew his way and came alone. He used a portkey and is somewhere in Northeast Asia. We must tell the queen. Wednesday, October 16, 199,620 miles south of Belair, Gorobieski District Saka, Republican Federation. The Wahila sat on the muddy road and let out a sad howl. The scent trail ended here, and the prey wasn't here. It knew its master will be disappointed and angry. Up to this moment, Lucas was full of hope. The escapee's campsite was really fresh. He could still feel the warmth of the campfire's ashes, a remarkable achievement, considering the man had a day's head start, and he'd lost another 2 when a rain has washed away the trail. Now he heard the beast's report of failure and felt a burning anger building up in him. Kicking out, he snapped a full-grown tree in half like a twig, the first to show his rage, but not the last. Behind the red haze, part of his mind noted that the local humans will recognize his handiwork for years to come. But there was nothing wrong with that. The Yakuts were better off knowing their place, under the thumb of the Queen in the north. And those knew better than alerting their Ministry of Magic, as that was more distant and less threatening than the power of Mab. Friday, October 18, 1996, Yakutsk Republican Federation. Refreshed by a good night's sleep, a decent human breakfast, clad in decent human clothing, and having a wallet full of decent human money, Sebastian Orlov, T. Chernobog cultist and operative of the Black Fist, felt that life is good. He was standing before a nondescript house in a totally average part of the city, where one of his brethren he called on a phone directed him. The house was a gathering place for the cult, and a memorized apparition place for some of their wizards. Soon one will come for him, and at last he can report back to his superiors. No doubt, Rasputin would want to hear all about the self-proclaimed queen in the north. Chapter 398, Chasing Darina. Saturday, October 19, 1996, Russian Ministry of Magics. Petersburg, Atlantis, DEFCON status. 415%, the Minister of Magic heard a whistle behind him. Turning, he saw Oleg the intern heading towards him with an excited expression on his face. "Sir, I think we've found something interesting pertaining to the Zygonovs." The minister looked at him hopefully. "You've found them. Where are they?" "We don't know, sir. However, we've discovered that they were spending a lot of time with a woman named Darina Vovchenkaya. She's in her late 20s and is a known witch." The minister frowned. "Is Vovchenkaya also a Death Eater?" "I'm not sure, sir. However, we did find one thing that they shared which was most intriguing. You see, all 3 of them are members of the cult of T. Chernobog." The minister's eyebrows shot up. "They're blackguard cultists." "It appears so, sir. The cult has many members in the former Soviet nations, after all. We've always passed them off as crackpots. The fact that they have wizards, however, is a little disturbing." The minister sighed. "The Zygonovs' religious beliefs aren't pertinent to the issue here. What would a bunch of blackguard cultists have to do with a Death Eater attack in England?" "Nothing that I can think of, sir, and that's the problem. Granted, the blackguard cult has always prided itself on bringing back T. Chernobog to bring about the end of the world. I wouldn't put terrorism by them." The minister dismissed that impatiently. "There's no way that is going to happen. Now that the statute of secrecy is gone, we can just start having the Muggles look for them. The blackguard cult is leaderless and powerless, my friend." "Were any of the Death Eaters also blackguard cultists, sir?" "Not that I know of, Oleg. However, it wouldn't be a bad idea for you to double-check that." Oleg gulped. "It will be done, sir. In the meantime, I suggest that we start tracking this Vovchenkaya woman as well. Although it is unlikely that she was involved in the attack, it's possible she could lead us to the Zygonovs." The minister nodded. "Make it so, Oleg. In the meantime, I should probably report this to Atlantis. They'll put out a bulletin looking for Vovchenkaya as well. I'll recommend 30,000 galleons, as she's not a suspect at this time. She isn't at the same level as the Zygonovs." "You're going all the way to Atlantis with this?" The minister grabbed a quill and a piece of parchment. "Absolutely. First, this woman may lead us to the Zygonovs. Second, an unusually large number of Muggle blackguard cultists tried to get into the lottery for Atlantis." Judging from the list I have here, we lucked out, and none of them were actually chosen. But it's an interesting development, particularly in light of this discovery. Ciudadani Council Chamber. Sayatnan looked at the report in disbelief. Are you sure this is right, Vixar? Vixar nodded. It is, Sayatnan. The Americans have found out that we exist and are not happy about it. It as we feared, ladies. We got the message out either too late or to the wrong people. A good 21% of the American people wants to see us destroyed at the moment, and I suspect that percentage is going to increase with time. Ortaloo gritted her teeth. Shit, has Bill Clinton said anything? Vixar began pacing around the room. Clinton is in a difficult position. We have reason to believe that he wants us destroyed. However, his economy is in recession, and he has already advocated a more isolationist policy. If he attacks us, he cheats on the isolationism. If he doesn't, he goes against the will of the people. The latter could be quite damaging to him, particularly since the United States chooses its next president in 2 weeks. Sayatnan growled, bad timing. Indeed, Sayatnan. Had this been after the election, things could have been different. Ortilou cut in, but they already messed around with us. They forced us to emancipate the Yahoos. Vixar looked out the window. That was a black op, from what we've heard. It wasn't officially on the record, and the vast majority of Americans didn't know about it. They probably weren't using all of their military capacity. Also, keep in mind that Nestor was considering an alliance with the Americans as well. Our biggest threat there was Nestor, not the United States, because the United States officially didn't know we existed at the time. Sayatnan slammed her fist on the table. But they do now. Indeed, they do now. This gives them more deadly and dangerous options. Ortaloo shook her head. Has Clinton said anything yet? You still haven't answered that question. He has, in fact. He said that the government has known about us for a while and sent agents in to help improve the lives of Muggles in our land. It's a clever compromise. He doesn't try to provoke us. He makes himself look good with the election coming up, and he doesn't start wasting money on another war after he's recommended isolationism. Assuming the Americans don't get too angry at us, we may be able to get away with this. This assumes, of course, that we don't start by picking a fight with them. Sayatnan's jaw dropped. You're thinking of attacking them? No way, Vixar. Absolutely no way. Vixar smiled and shook his head. We're not going to attack them. The United States is an extremely powerful nation, and as we saw last time, they'll manhandle us. However, there are many hotheads here on the island who have been urging some of the committees I'm involved with to join with a group of wizards in Iraq, who are also wizard supremacists. These Iraqi wizards have offered an alliance with us. They're willing to use Iraqi weapons and materiel, both Muggle and wizarding, to defend us in case the Americans attack. They will also keep our lower classes in line. In return, we will let them into our government as observers and advisors. We also give them monetary aid and let them use our materiel if necessary. Ortilou frowned. Iraq, why does that name sound familiar? It's because that is Saddam Hussein's nation. President Hussein was one of the 2 Muggle leaders who had to turn the Judgment Day keys back on June 20th. He doesn't have a Judgment Day key anymore, of course. They now belong to the 2 modern superpowers, the United States and Russia, the most important member of the former Soviet Union. Sayatnan thought for a moment. What do you think about this alliance? Vixar put his hands behind his back. I'm personally in favor of it. We need some help at this point, as it's almost certain the Americans are going to try to interfere again at some point. I don't like bringing in the Iraqis. However, we don't have much of a choice, I'm afraid. I was going to recommend a tentative alliance, which will solidify itself if the Muggles do start attacking us. What happens if the Iraqis send Muggle soldiers over? Vixar grinned. I highly doubt they will, Sayatnan. Ortilou shook her head. These Iraqis are Muslims, are they not? Yes, Ortilou. Could Muslims for Humans get involved? We don't want Muslims for Humans infiltrating Círdan and agitating the lower classes against us. Vixar drew a deep breath. I sure hope not. However, you have to keep in mind that most Muslims are not like that. Like any religious movement, the majority of the people are peaceful, and it is only the lunatic fringes that give them a bad reputation. Muslims for Humans is a distinct minority. Won't they see us as infidels? Quite possibly. However, I doubt they'll jeopardize the alliance by trying to start a religious war with us. Besides, the vast majority of Muslims are not lunatics. It's quite possible we may agree to disagree. The three discussed the Iraqi alliance a little more. Eventually, they gave it a tentative approval, at least for a few months, until the crisis with the United States passed. Finally, later that evening, the meeting adjourned. They left the room to issue their report to the rest of the cabinet. Ortilu looked over her shoulder. What was the name of the head Iraqi wizard again? Vixar began scanning his document. I can't remember offhand. It's on this document, however. All I can remember is that I believe he's Indian and came to Iraq a few months ago. Let's hope he doesn't hit the United States with a preemptive attack and drag us into it. Chapter 399. Another Brick in the Wall. Sunday, October 20, 1996, site of Western Wall, Jerusalem, Atlantis, DEFCON status. 416% next up. J.K. Rowling gives up on the Harry Potter books. Eek. Wizard Amamos, formerly associated with Hamas and the Death Eaters, looked up at the newly rebuilt Western Wall. The plan to rebuild the wall had been announced during the Shemini Atzeret services at the temple and had been intended to serve as a project which would bring people of all of the Abrahamic denominations, and then some, together. Some people had immediately started running outside to start working on the project. Samuel, however, had requested that they wait until the holiday had ended, since difficult manual labor should not be performed on a holiday, which also happened to be a Saturday to boot. This inevitably led to a big discussion over whether volunteer work for a spiritually uplifting experience was permissible on the holiday. Amamos had watched, partially amused, as the rabbis started arguing over fine points of the 5 books of Moses, while a good 40% of the pilgrims ignored them and headed off to start work on the ruined wall. Amamos had gone out of his way to help with the reconstruction process. After all, he had been inserted by Rodolphus Lestrange to infiltrate the Middle East, and he had been in one of the discussions to demolish the wall. He hoped that Allah would accept this form of atonement. It turned out, however, that the help of a wizard would be much appreciated. The explosion which had flattened most of the wall had thrown rocks all over the place, and Amamos had to cast several spells to bring back all of the rocks. Meanwhile, the Muggles were poring over pre-attack photographs of the wall to make sure that all of the rocks were in the right place. A good 15% of the rocks had been damaged beyond repair, and 5% more had suffered scorch marks in the explosion, which would be inappropriate at a holy shrine. After meeting secretly with the Israeli Ministry of Magic and Prime Minister Netanyahu, Amamos agreed to replace them with rocks from a nearby quarry and make them so they looked like the stones they had replaced. This was kept absolutely secret, of course. Nevertheless, a good 80% of the rocks were recovered and put back in their original positions. The Western Wall reconstruction project had turned the Israeli hotel industry on its ear, as hundreds of thousands of pilgrims, sick and tired of living in their tents, had checked into hotels to make sure that they would be able to participate in this act of kindness. Prices skyrocketed, and people wound up staying in their tents a little longer or renting cars and driving in from places as far away as Haifa, despite warnings that there could be slightly above average radioactivity there from the Judgment Day dirty bomb. The scene looked like something out of the Book of Exodus, except that the construction project was to honor God instead of to mock him. Whenever possible, the builders used technology and magic, known to the classical Israelite kingdom. The paparazzi surrounded him as he and Mickle Oved prepared to lift the last rock, a good 15-ton monster, up to the top of the wall, finishing the construction. Waiting for the cameraman to give the signal, they picked up the huge brick and put it in place at the top of the wall. Construction workers swarmed around it with rocks and wooden beams to make sure it stayed in place. Once everything looked like it was all right, the workers nodded and left. The western wall was complete once more. The Jews of Jerusalem started singing songs of praise and rushed over to the wall to pray and insert notes which, according to tradition, would be read by God himself. Running pilgrims and Israelis nearly trampled each other en route to the wall, and eventually the wizards had to lift some of them into the air to get them to all access the wall in a timely fashion. Ordinary tourists were respectfully told to depart to make room for the pilgrims. The Cohen Gadol then announced that he was thinking of extending the dome of the rock to accommodate larger numbers of people. Plans were in the works to add additional wings and courtyards to the temple, which would wend their way down the Temple Mount and include the reconstructed Western Wall. Some of the conservative Muslims grumbled about this a little, but the Cohen Gadol placated them by saying that they could restrict themselves to the current site if they so wished. Barely audible over the chanting pilgrims, Mickle Oved nodded and looked at him. "You know, Amamos, I never thought I'd find myself doing this with you. Hell, I thought I'd have to Avada Kedavra you at some point. Come to think of it, I had a death warrant out for you shortly before Judgment Day." Amamos laughed. "Don't worry about that, Minister. That Amamos is dead. You can tear that up now." Mickle nodded, reached out to shake his hand, but then drew it back when she remembered that religious Muslims generally did not shake the hands of people of the opposite gender. "Don't worry, I will. Which reminds me, do you want to work for us now?" Amamos shrugged. "I don't see why not." Cyril Asiaden, emancipation wasn't as good as he thought it was, host Arsenerno thought to himself. He then kicked himself when he realized he'd added his master's name again. He needed to get accustomed to thinking of himself as a free man. With freedom, of course, came a price. He had to think for himself, which proved difficult. All his instincts told him to ask other people for help, a habit which eventually began to irritate them. It would take him a long time for him to gain enough self-esteem to start making his own decisions. He had wanted to spend some time starting his own farm and possibly buying his own tractor. Unfortunately, tractors were expensive, and land was even more expensive. The money he had received as part of the emancipation program had been barely enough for him to afford a small house on the relatively unpopulated eastern side of the island, far away from Seardash. He knew how to grow things pretty well, so he decided to see if he could turn a 5-acre plot of land into a one-man farm. He'd spent a lot of his startup fund to buy seeds and plant them. With all the rain from the exposure of Howiehamland, there would be lots of crops around. The problem was that crops wouldn't grow in a day without magic. And the wizards were not helping him at all. With most of the American support force gone, the wizards were basically throwing rocks at him and bullying him. Slavery may have vanished, but discrimination persisted. A couple of friends of his were hexed for no other reason than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Most of his friends had gone to Nestor. By the time he had realized what was going on, the Nestorian ambassador had left, and he was stuck over here. Granted, he would likely find himself very popular with the women. However, he doubted he could feed two on his lot. He had paid a good 30 galleons, a lot of money, to join a lottery to get some support from the United States and Atlantis. As it turned out, he won a device which would magically irrigate his field. At least he wouldn't have to go water the plants all the time during droughts, he thought. Wondering what food was available today, he headed into town where an Atlantis agent was giving out food and drink. It was a good 2-hour walk each way, but he was accustomed to walking. As he got into town, a dingy old woman tapped him on the shoulder and told him that he dropped something. Wary that this was a robbery attempt, he held on to his possessions as he looked behind himself. Sure enough, There was a little card on the floor. Fairly certain that it wasn't his, he picked it up to tell the woman it wasn't his. However, by the time he had stood up, the woman was gone. Curious, he looked at the card, and his eyes widened attention. Freed Muggles of Círdan. Are you having trouble making ends meet? Do you believe we should be getting more help from the wizards? Are your representatives in Círdash being ignored by men and women now considered our equals? In short, has our new order not improved your way of life, or possibly even worsened it? We of the Círdan Muggle resistance movement are here to help. Under our leader, Frederic Launesi, we plan to do to Círdan what our colleagues in Howinghamland did in the Pacific. Miss Launesi is a Vila from Nestor who sympathizes with and supports our mission. We plan to overthrow the tyrants and turn Círdan into a state where the Muggles rule the wizards, not the other way around. Are you interested, intrigued, willing to help? If you are, meet us in front of the building across the street from the place you received this card at 2 a.m. tomorrow morning. Make yourself heard and turn Círdan into the Muggle-friendly democracy you always wanted it to be. Sincerely, the Círdan Muggle Resistance Movement. P.S. The woman who gave you this note was a Vila in disguise. P.P.S. Thanks to our Nestorian wizarding friend, this message will self-destruct in 10 seconds. I'd drop it if I were you. Hostar dropped the message in a combination of shock and surprise. 10 seconds later, it vanished in a puff of smoke. His mind raced. A Muggle resistance movement to turn the tables on the wizards for good. He needed to get involved with this. He didn't have a wife and children, and it was fairly obvious that as long as the wizards were on the island, the Muggles would never get fair treatment. He looked across the street, where an old office building had a big plaza in front of it. That must be the meeting site, he thought. He decided he'd check it out, provided that he would be able to get up at midnight and walk 2 hours in the dark. Nah, he thought to himself. I'll sleep on the ground tonight, maybe under a tree, maybe 20 minutes away from here. I don't like it, but I've done it before. I really don't want to miss this. Chapter 400. Hermione Granger and the Philosopher's Stone. Monday, October 21, 1996, Great Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizard United Kingdom Atlantis, DEFCON status. 415% next up. It's the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. The huge double doors opened, and J.K. Rowling found herself in the Great Hall of Hogwarts. This time, however, she knew exactly how she had come to find herself in the castle and what this was all for. This was much better than last time, where she had awoken in an old closet near the Great Hall and had no idea how she had gotten there. Her confusion had lasted only a matter of moments, just long enough for her to leave the closet and see hundreds of people waiting to see which house King William had been sorted into. That had been a month and a half ago. Once again, she was in the magical school to be present at a press conference. This time, however, she wasn't going to be a reporter. She was going to be the speaker, accompanied by 2 students and one of the vice presidents of Bloomsbury Publishing. She watched as some of the staff and Muggle paparazzi began settling into their seats. The students, for the most part, were absent, Flitwick having refused to allow them to skip classes to attend the conference. However, not all of them were absent. She turned to look at Harry and Hermione as they took their seats at the front of the room, next to the podium. Rowling turned to Harry. "You're sure you're all right with this, Harry? I figure you wanted to be famous, but—" Harry shook his head. "People may know my name, but I'm not superhuman like the people in the stories. Hermione here, on the other hand, has developed a reputation which far exceeds anything I could have even dreamed of." Rowling nodded. "I'm aware of that." Turning to Hermione, Rowling bowed slightly. "Countess, I—" Hermione rolled her eyes. "Don't call me Countess, Ms. Rowling, and don't bow. I still see myself as an ordinary human being just like you. Call me Hermione. To be honest, I don't even think William is accustomed to being thought of as Your Majesty or Mr. Windsor. As far as my reputation goes, I just did what I thought I had to do. I had to save myself from that explosion, and while I was at it, I figured I'd protect other people as well. So you've told me, Hermione. Still, you've become a heroine all over Britain. Are you aware that Hermione is fast becoming the most popular name for baby girls in English-speaking countries? Harry chuckled as Hermione's face turned white. Actually, Miss Rowling, I didn't. God, that's embarrassing. Rowling was about to continue the conversation when someone tapped her on the shoulder. It was Headmaster Flitwick. How often did this school go through headmasters? The man nodded and gestured at the podium. It's all yours, Miss Rowling. The podium has been enchanted so that your voice can be heard all over the room. No microphones will be necessary. Rowling thanked him and walked over to the podium with Harry and Hermione trailing behind her. The crowd fell silent as she began to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Joe Rowling, and I'm a columnist for the Daily Mail. I've been focusing on issues relating to the wizarding world. As you know, the world has changed drastically since little Harry here flew his broom in front of that blast Kohler camera. I had always wanted to write a story about a magical school, yet I never imagined that such schools actually existed. People all over the world want to learn more about what life is like at these schools, and do so without interfering with the education of the students. With this in mind, it is my pleasure to announce that Bloomsbury Publishing and I have just agreed on a deal for a 7-book series, which will document the life of one of our nation's best-known and most admired wizarding students, Hermione Granger. These books will focus on her career at Hogwarts, 1 year at a time. The first book will start with her finding out that she was a witch and continue through the end of her first year, 1992. Each succeeding book will discuss her experiences during the years after that. There will be 7 books, one for each year at Hogwarts. The first book, Hermione Granger and the Philosopher's Stone, will be available in hardcover in April 1997 and in paperback a few months thereafter. Much of the research for the book has already been done thanks to my interviews with Harry, who was originally going to be the focus of the series. However, now that Hermione has emerged on the world stage, and that Harry and Hermione have shared many of their experiences, the 2 young wizards and I have agreed to switch the focus of the documentary over to Hermione. Hermione Granger and the Philosopher's Stone will discuss Hermione's meeting Ron and Harry, nearly being killed by a troll in the girls' bathroom, only to be saved at the last minute by Harry and Ron, and thwarting Lord Voldemort's servant Quirinius Quirrell as he pursued immortality through a Philosopher's Stone, originally created by Nicholas Flamel, our current Minister of Magic. Each book will be geared towards an audience whose age matches that of Hermione in the book. For instance, this first book will be geared towards children 11 or 12 years old. The titles of the first 5 books have already been determined, with each book coming out 1 year after the previous. They will be Hermione Granger and the Philosopher's Stone, Hermione Granger and the Chamber of Secrets, Hermione Granger and the Time Turner, Hermione Granger and the Bulgarian Seeker, and Hermione Granger and the Super Bowl Breach. Since this is currently Hermione's 6th year, we have no idea what will happen in the last 2 books. However, given all of the aftershocks from the exposure of the wizarding world, you can be assured that it will be exciting. Hermione will spend some time each weekend speaking with me and bringing me up to date on what has happened. Accuracy is going to be important here, as this series is designed to serve both as a historical documentary as well as a children's novel. She reached into her pocket and brought out a piece of paper. I would like to take the opportunity to read the first chapter of Hermione Granger and the Philosopher's Stone. Hopefully, this will give you a taste of what is to come. Chapter 1. The Girl Who Lived Differently. Hermione Granger knew she was gifted. Atlantis, Darina Vovchinkaya, polyjuiced as a dead muggle, and with a wand fidelious to her, looked at the man next to him, and then at the 2 Atlantean guards who had escorted them to the house. This is it, gentlemen. This is Misha and Mila's house. The escorts nodded. That's it. Do you need any more assistance? No, thank you, sir. You've been very kind, and I hope that this helps improve wizard-muggle relations. Do you know how to get back? Yes, my husband here has a good sense of direction. Excellent. My name is Dionysus, and don't hesitate to ask if you have any other questions. The two guards walked off. Making sure the way was clear, Vovchankaya knocked on the door. Seconds later, she heard Halina say, "Hello, who is this?" "Mila, it's Anya. I've come for a visit." She hadn't actually come for a visit as much as to stay. It was a code phrase indicating they were Rasputinites. Halina continued, "Wow, how'd you get over here?" "Atlantis flew us over on their magic brooms." The door unlocked with a click as Halina said, "Come on in. The water's fine." Vovchankaya and her accomplice stepped into the main room and shook the Zyganov's hands. Zyganov looked at them, closed the windows, cast a spell to ensure privacy, and whistled. "We've got a problem. Darina, you're going to have to go back. This is not going to work." Vovchankaya stared at him in alarm. "Oh, what happened?" Zyganov put it bluntly. "Things are getting hot here. Atlantis has figured out that the Black Guard cult is involved. What's more, they've tied you to us. The wanted poster isn't out yet, but you can rest assured that it will be shortly." Vovchankaya winced. "Great, what are we going to do?" Zyganov nodded at the man who had come with her. "Piotr here should stay with you for the time being. Keep yourself polyjuiced at all times, even inside the house. Do not, I repeat, do not do anything suspicious, and stay away from the police. Give us the polyjuice potion you came with. We'll masquerade as the people you two masqueraded as in a few hours after we've discussed plans and leave. Once we get back to Ukraine, we'll ask Rasputin to send a woman over to take your place, preferably a new recruit, or possible, even a black fist muggle, since you know how to brew polyjuice. Piotr can serve as our mole here in the meantime. Hopefully we'll have you out of here in a few days, at most a week." Piotr gawked at him. "Damn, Genya, are they actually onto us?" "I sure hope not. If they kill off Rasputin and destroy his Horcrux before we can bring back Lord Kashey, there will be hell to pay as Kashey, and his Horcrux will likely be assigned automatically to Boris Yeltsin, the closest thing that exists to the advisor to the Romanov Tsar. Hand over the polyjuice potions. Thanks. Piotr, here's my fake id. I go by Misha Kohut here, and your partner will go by Mila." Piotr nodded. "Misha and Mila, got it." Zyganov pointed. "The Kohut hairs and polyjuice components are in a cabinet over here. There should be more than enough to get us through the next 6 months, at which point Kashey's takeover of Atlantis will likely be complete, and we will no longer need to hide anymore." Vovchankaya nodded. "Sounds like everything's all set. We chat for a moment to fool anyone who's watching and polyjuice into the Kohuts. You polyjuice into the people we came as and leave Atlantis. You send someone back polyjuiced in my current form to pick me up. She arrives and turns into Mila Kohut, while I resume my current form and leave." Zyganov nodded. "That's correct. Any questions?" The two visitors looked at each other and shook their heads. "Good, let's get down to business. Green Dragon Inneutral District Gulliver Gulliver Consortium." Most of Gulliver's landmass was partitioned between the member nations of the Gulliver Consortium, belonging to their jurisdiction. However, the region where the Senate and assorted offices stood was declared a neutral zone, and over time became a multicultural gathering place. For the rich, naturally. Even though neither his birthplace Círdan nor his second homeland Roctorattle was a member of the consortium, Salmon Nastheros was welcome here as long as he had money, and that he had enough, and then some. Sitting in a comfy armchair in the VIP backroom of a high-class establishment, dressed in tailored robes of the latest fashion, sipping exotic and very expensive wine, the only clue implying he wasn't always a rich aristocrat was the company he had old friends and partners of various races, some, like the pair of goblins wearing Muggle sunglasses even indoors, quite out of place, no matter how much money they left at the tailor's. His business enterprise was surpassing all expectations. His starting funds have produced profit, which he in turn invested again to upgrade his flying ship to the best of all the spellcraft of the hidden nations. Copycats were quick to follow, but being there first and having his Vila girlfriend with him at negotiations, he managed to obtain monopolies, concessions, and other exclusive trade arrangements, cementing his place among the most influential merchants operating between the hidden nations and the new Muggle/Merpeople trading posts, all in a matter of weeks. They also had the foresight to found a corporation, Nazthuro's shipping company, and now he made an offer to other flying ship captains. Join the company, pay a share of their profits, and benefit from those monopolies. So far, 17 other captains have taken up on the offer. There was some confusion about the company's laws, namely, if they should stick with the archaic guild design still dominant in the hidden nations, or to adopt some Muggle cleverness, like a franchise or a public limited company. Lacking familiarity with the latter, they agreed to settle the argument later and have individual contracts with Mr. Nazthuros as his employees. He, in turn, allowed them quite a bit of freedom, provided they followed some basic rules: no involvement in wars, no smuggling, etc., and was willing to listen to their advice. His musings were interrupted by someone knocking on the door. With permission granted to enter, a robed man came in. He was short, wiry, with tanned olive skin and curly black hair even without family sigil. The wizard was obviously Ciudadani. He bowed politely to another apparent Ciudadani and announced himself. Wizard Ayla Pharamos, at your service, my lord Nazthuros, and at yours too, ladies and gentle beings. As the tanned wizard didn't respond, and a pale, red-haired gentleman began to chuckle softly, Ayla blushed in embarrassment. He should have gone for the hair, instead of assuming his compatriot will have the same complexion after spending 2 decades in an underwater city devoid of sunlight. As the wizard quickly corrected his mistake, Sam went over what he knew about the man. The Pharamos family has been serving his for countless generations, first as overseers and retainers, but more often right-hand men. When his father started openly advocating abolition, they stayed loyal to him and were consequently punished when the noble and most ancient house of Nazthuros was stripped of all ranks and titles, of all lands and holdings, and exiled from Círdan. Obviously, they survived and regained some of their former influence. I presume you're here to join our brave and profitable enterprise, Wizard Pharamos. The man nodded in approval, but also pulled a large tome from under his robe. Correct, but there's something else I must do first. I've spent 2 decades reclaiming what I could of your family's possessions, and recently this item came to me. As the last scion of your house, this now belongs to you. Sam recognized the book at first sight. It was the 4th volume of the Nazthuros family grimoires, a priceless collection of magical lore accumulated over 2 millennia. Chapter 401, Gulliver Returns. Tuesday, October 22, 297 Ag-Ad 1990, 6 Lilliput Lantern Newspaper Lilliput Atlantis, DEFCON status. 415% next up. Where's an aging potion when I need one? Gulliver's descendants return in peace. We have all heard the legends about the return of the dread Lamel Gulliver, bringing about the end of the world. Teachers threatened to turn us over to Gulliver if we misbehaved in class. Parents begged us to reform our ways lest Gulliver take us, and we have wished that our former spouses and supervisors be punished by Gulliver time and time again. We've been taught from a young age that Gulliver and the rest of the evil Muggles sought to conquer our land and weaken our people by infecting us with deadly diseases. We've learned that the Gulliver Consortium was founded and protectors granted to all of its member states to prevent further Muggle intrusion and to buy time to rebuild our society in case the Muggles came calling again. Yesterday, the legends finally came true. Gulliver returned, but with the olive branch of peace instead of the sword of war. For the first time in hundreds of years, Muggles have set foot upon Lilliput and South Lilliput, and Hayes promised us that there will be no more epidemics among our people. At approximately 1:00 yesterday afternoon, a tremendous vessel carrying Muggles docked a few hundred feet away from the capital, and a Muggle man was escorted ashore by our own diplomats. This man stood approximately 6 feet 3 inches tall, a good 12 times the size of the average Lilliputian. He towered over our buildings, and when he explored our neighborhoods, walking around the perimeter to make sure he didn't damage any buildings or step on any people, the ground shook with every footstep he made. Many of you may have thought that the end of the world had come, and that the apocalypse heralded by Judgment Day was upon us. However, that is not the case. The man everyone in the city saw towering over the buildings was our new Muggle ambassador, the Honorable German Gulliver Brooks. If his last name sounds familiar, it should. Mr. Gulliver Brooks is a distant descendant, 11 generations, according to Muggle scholars, of a British explorer named Lemuel Gulliver. About 300 years ago, Lemuel Gulliver encountered our islands on a British mission of discovery. We will not bother you with this tale as you already know it. Needless to say, although the encounter with our ancestors went well at first, tragedy struck shortly thereafter, and the explorer's name was changed over time into Lemuel Gulliver and considered synonymous with the Dark One. Our wizards and politicians, including Her Majesty the Queen, have spoken with the Muggles to determine what happened. You may be amazed to learn that the assault of the tremendous, carnivorous animals known as rats and dogs Gulliver unleashed upon our nations was, in fact, unintentional. Stated simply, Lemuel Gulliver and his crew were carrying large Muggle animals which saw most of our food sources as prey, and would have likely eaten us had it not been for our wings. Gulliver may have been civilized enough to not try to intentionally hurt us, but when those animals got off the ship, that was a completely different story. There was no way for Captain Gulliver to have known, as he would have very likely not been paying attention to his small animals at the time. After all, do you keep track of your pets 24 hours a day? Gulliver Brooks was horrified when we told him the story of the attacks of 29 Ag. Throwing diplomatic protocols out the window, he broke down in tears, a sight which all of you could not have missed as he towered above most of the buildings. Although he knew very little about his explorer ancestor, he was fairly certain that Lemuel Gulliver, the man we had thought of as evil incarnate, would have reacted the same way. Although he speaks a different dialect of Gulliver from the rest of us, that booming, the animals ate most of your food, while virgin soil diseases got everyone else sick, would have woken the dead. Our wizards were skeptical at first and subjected him to a veritaserum test, whereupon they found that he had been telling the truth the entire time. Our authorities then sent messages the British Minister of Magic, Nicholas Flamel, for confirmation. Not only did Minister Flamel confirm this, he explained that he remembered the incident very well. Recall that Minister Flamel is over 600 years old, having lived this great age due to a now-destroyed Philosopher's Stone. The ministry suspected a virgin soil pandemic or invasive species incident almost from the beginning, as similar conditions had killed most of the people in North America in the 16th and 17th centuries AD. However, since the statute of secrecy was already in place, there was little the wizards could do to help without exposing themselves. Flamel recounts a near schism in the British wizarding world over assisting our people through those terrible early years. After rancorous debate, the ministry decided not to intervene. This was not out of malice, however, as the British wizards argued that our own wizards should be able to stop the animals. In our defense, our ancestors did actually manage to reduce the mortality rate from 90%, as it had been in North America, to between 30% and 40%. But even this rate, 1 out of every 3 people dying on short notice, is still a major disaster. Note that the other Gulliver nations' experiences with widespread disease also had a Muggle explanation. It was in fact a situation known as a virgin soil pandemic, where diseases in one area suddenly find themselves transmitted to a second which is not prepared for them, and as a result, everyone gets sick. The Muggles had already adapted themselves to not have to worry about the diseases, so they didn't even know they had them. However, when Gulliver interacted with us, the diseases spread to our communities and appeared seemingly out of nowhere a few years later. Although Mr. Gulliver Brooks represents the United Kingdom, Lemuel Gulliver's nation, he says he is willing to serve as our representative to other nations, as well in case our inhabitants are not comfortable interacting with Muggles yet. He will take on this new responsibility after 1 year of working with us and getting to know us. Nothing can atone for the horrors Lemuel Gulliver unwittingly unleashed upon our people. However, the British have ensured that all of the members of the Gulliver Consortium receive appropriate monetary and medical compensation for the attacks. The Muggle world is in an economic recession right now, yet no fewer than 15 major Muggle powers, including both judgment key holders, are contributing to a compensation fund. Our people will be trained in medical practices, which can do wonders even from a magical standpoint. Muggle medical practices will be analyzed by the government and by the Senate in Glubbdubdrib, and will be available to all citizens once they are deemed safe and effective. The monetary compensation will be more than enough to cover our debts and help improve the infrastructure all over the Gulliver Consortium. Many of you may wonder about whether the Gulliver Consortium will continue to operate now that its original purpose, the defense of the world from Gulliver, is now gone. Rest assured, it will. We have been working together for centuries now, and that is not going to change. The Gulliver Senate has served a role similar to the Muggle entity known as the United Nations, diffusing issues before they can escalate into a war. For those of you in South Lilliput who missed seeing the ambassador, be advised that he will be visiting Blefuscu this afternoon and spending a few hours exploring South Lilliput. He may be tall and a Muggle, but do not hurt him. He is a diplomat here to help us, and the head wizard himself is convinced that he means no harm. He intends to travel to Brobdingnag on Friday to provide second contact with the giants. His plan is to meet with all of the nations Gulliver discovered in the order they were seen. Nations which joined the consortium later, such as Dalanus, will be visited at the end. On behalf of the Lilliput Lantern, we would like to welcome Ambassador Gulliver Brooks to our land. We both sincerely hope and pray that second contact will be much more peaceful and mutually beneficial than first contact, judging from what we all heard yesterday from Mr. Gulliver Brooks. This seems extremely likely. After all, it's already been 1 day since he arrived upon our shores, and we have not seen one attack by one of his creatures. Chapter 402, The Deathly Hallows. Wednesday, October 23, 1996. Hogs Head, Tavern, Hogsmeade, United Kingdom. Atlantis DEFCON status. 415% Harry and Ron had been looking forward to this Hogsmeade trip for a while. Unfortunately, this trip had proven to be a bit of a letdown. With all of the dementors and auras scouring the town for information on the Death Eater who had attacked Hogwarts and killed Professor Snape, the mood in the city was somber, to say the least. The dementors were making everyone depressed, and several of the shopkeepers were so down that they had simply closed their shops until the crisis had passed. There weren't many customers, and most of the people browsing in the stores hadn't been in the mood to buy anything useful. There was still no new information about the attacker. The Daily Prophet had reported that Flamel could have sworn that all of the Death Eaters in Britain had been accounted for, and that no new cells had started up since Judgment Day. Nature abhorred a vacuum, as Professor Hawking liked to say, so the rumor mill immediately began turning. The attack had purported been triggered by a revived Voldemort, a Snape who had turned back to the Death Eaters and been killed by the Auras, Britain for Humans somehow having the nerve to hire a wizard, and so forth. None of these seemed to fit the circumstances, however. Large sections of Hogsmeade were off limits as the Dementors continued the investigation. The Forbidden Forest was also out of bounds, but this time for an entirely different reason. Supposedly a fight had broken out between the Dementors investigating the forest and the centaurs there, and several people had been killed on both sides. There were rumors that Aragog, Hagrid's half-tame acromantula, had been killed by the Aurors as a creature that big would have been a threat to both Hogsmeade and Hogwarts. Aragog had gotten a few reprieves at first when his supposed executioners had collapsed in pain when they tried to kill him, thanks to the Aes Sedai oaths preventing use of magical against sentient beings. Eventually, though, they managed to find someone who was not sworn and dispatch him that way. Harry would have paid to see the expression on Hagrid's face if the former care of magical creatures professor ever returned to school. Students were not allowed to travel around Hogsmeade unless they were in groups of at least 3 or more, or there was a teacher in attendance. For the first time, underage wizards were allowed to defend themselves outside of school without having to worry about disciplinary hearings. Harry and Ron had planned to explore the city a little with Hermione, but Aberforth Dumbledore had held Hermione behind as soon as the group emerged into the Hog's Head from the Room of Requirement. When Harry asked why Hermione couldn't attend, Aberforth claimed that Hermione had been inducted into the Order of the Phoenix now that she had turned 17. She would not be able to do much during the semester, of course. However, since the Order had now set up shop in Hogsmeade, she would at least be able to attend the meetings. Harry had been a bit miffed at Aberforth's decision. For one thing, they had been forced to find a third person to go exploring with them, which inevitably meant both Ginny and Neville. However, Harry couldn't help but think that he had a right to be the member of the Order. So he wasn't 17 yet. Big deal. He had earned it for crying out loud. He had destroyed 2 Horcruxes, the locket and the cup. In fact, if the rumors were true about Tom Riddle's diary, he had actually finished off 3. He was a trained Voldemort hunter, yet he was not officially a member of the Order. What the hell was going on here? Where's an aging potion when I need one? He thought. Harry and his friends noticed that many Muggle stores had opened up in Hogsmeade. Amazingly, they were actually doing a decent amount of business. The shopkeepers may have felt a little down because of the dementors. However, their saving grace was the fact that they couldn't actually see the dementors. The food service establishments were getting 0 customers, as the wizarding food was much better than Muggle food. Electronic equipment was popular until the Muggles realized it wouldn't work well with wizards running around. Games like Scrabble and Monopoly had made inroads into British wizarding society, and supposedly Hasbro was in the process of making a wizarding version of Monopoly with Atlantis in the boardwalk space. After what seemed to have been an hour, Hermione raced down from the upper levels of the tavern, followed by the rest of the members of the Order of the Phoenix. She gestured frantically for Ron and Harry to follow her. Aberforth glared at her sharply for a moment. She glared right back at him, at which point he threw his hands up in the air and nodded. Excited, the 3 students headed into an empty store for the debriefing. Harry spoke first. "All right, Hermione, what can you tell us that we're not supposed to know?" Hermione whistled. "A lot. They're still working with Atlantis to try to figure out who these Zygonovs are working for. They've discovered that a group of people associated with the Black God T. Chernobog may be involved. We can't tell if their association with T. Chernobog is coincidental, though. The investigation is continuing." Harry frowned. T. Cherno what? T. Chernobog. He's an evil Slavic god, and he's got a bit of a cult following in Eastern Europe. Think of him roughly on the same level as Satan. Ron grunted. Devil worshippers, what a surprise. Voldemort would fit right in. Amen. Ron, does this cult have a branch in Britain? Not that I know of, which is even more puzzling. However, Harry, I've come across some information which will affect you personally. For some reason, you could be a target for the Death Eaters. Harry stared at her. Bloody what? Why aren't they telling me this? Hermione looked down the street to make sure no one was watching. Are you familiar with the story of the Deathly Hallows? Ron nodded. Harry, however, shook his head. Never heard of it. Hermione explained. It's a wizarding tale which was believed to be a legend until Perennial Flamel claimed that it was true. Ran's jaw dropped. The Deathly Hallows really exist. Yes, Ran, now let me finish, this time with the legend turned into information which is more likely and more practical. Many years ago, someone in the story Death created three powerful magical items: the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, and the Invisibility Cloak. The tale goes on to say that whoever collects all three of these artifacts can become the Master of Death. Harry's eyes widened. Master of Death? You mean he can overrule death and bring people back to life? Hermione nodded. That's the theory. Dr. Flamel and the rest of the Ministry is convinced that the attack on Hogwarts was an attempt to take control of the Elder Wand, which happened to be in use by Dumbledore at the time. Once they have all three Hallows, they cast some powerful spell to revive Voldemort from the dead. Harry swore, "Bloody hell, just what we need." Ron, however, was focused on something else. Turning to Hermione, he said, "Dumbledore has the Elder Wand." Hermione shook her head. Had Ron, if the stories are correct, defeating the Elder Wand's owner in battle causes the wand to change its allegiance to the person who won the duel. Considering that Dumbledore's wand is now gone, and that a Death Eater shot him, the Ministry is assuming that they've already gotten their first Hallow. Ron and Harry looked at each other. Bloody hell, that's bad. Hermione continued. That leaves two Hallows left. The Resurrection Stone was also in Dumbledore's possession. In fact, Voldemort made a Horcrux out of it. We can rest assured that the Death Eaters are not going to get that because Flamel's wife had that shipped directly to Atlantis. If all else fails, Dagger can always order Linda Warren to send it off into space. Both boys laughed at that. However, Harry's chuckling stopped abruptly. Hermione, what happens if a Death Eater mole makes it into Atlantis? Hermione grinned. Highly unlikely, Harry. They do background checks. Besides, like I said, they can always send the Resurrection Stone into the sun somewhere that should destroy it. Her expression then turned serious. Here is where Harry comes in. Although we know that the Death Eaters won't be able to reunite the Hallows, they don't. This means that they are naturally going to try to get their hands on everything, including the third Hallow, the Invisibility Cloak. Ron snorted. What does Harry have to do with? His voice drained away. Slowly, he looked at Harry and then back at Hermione. You have got to be kidding. Hermione shook her head. I'm afraid not. Dumbledore had Harry's cloak in his possession for a while. He strongly believes that it is the third Hallow. Harry nodded abruptly. That explains why Flitwick and Moody wanted my cloak. Exactly. They realize that the cloak's owner may be in danger, and they want to take it onto themselves. They want to keep you safe. Harry, do not ask for that cloak back, because you're not going to get it. Harry grumbled. Can I at least get the Marauder's map back? I'm afraid not, Harry. The Order doesn't have it, and even if it did, Flitwick is right. If you get that back, the school will confiscate it immediately. As it is, the map may already be in Death Eater hands. Harry looked at his two friends. I see. So what are we going to do about this? Crabbe and Goyle took advantage of the Hogsmeade trip to spend some time in the library. Crabbe admitted that he'd probably not spent this much time in the library during his previous 5 years combined. He opened the book on potions and slammed his finger down on the page. That's it, Greg, Polyjuice Potion. We take the forms of Ron and Harry, incapacitate them, enter the Gryffindor common room, and take the cloak. If we're lucky, Harry will have it on him, and will be able to nick it without having to risk using the potion. Goyle looked at the potion description and frowned. I'm not sure about this. Without Snape to help us, this looks like it's going to be tricky. Crabbe nodded. Indeed, it will be tricky. However, we're almost 17. We can't rely on Draco anymore, and we're going to have to take risks to get this Death Eater cell to approve of us. Well, my friend, are you in? Goyle looked at the potion, swallowed, and nodded. You got it. I'm in. Let's get cracking. Tuesday, October 22, 297 Ag Ad 1996 Green Dragon Inneutral District Club de Gulliver Consortium. To understand Ayla Faramos's gift, we have to take a look at magocracies. In mundane, modern societies, the threat of Muggles, should the statute of secrecy fail, was serious enough to force the wizards to cooperate and share as much power with each other as they could. National or even international magic schools become the norm, and homeschooling is negligible. Schools teach spells for all aspects of life, and when the newly graduated student gets a job or some post-grad studies, his colleagues gladly share most of their knowledge with him. Of course, noble and most ancient houses, especially those who, like the Malfoys, live off their lands and holdings, tend to monopolize knowledge as long as they can get away with it. But that usually means secret dietary requirements of a new breed of magical sheep, as anything less situation-specific will very soon leak out to the general public, like Snape's Sectum Sempra curse. Magocracies are not like that. From their founding to the last years of the 20th century, none of the hidden nations has been threatened by Muggles. If the race has dedicated spellcasters, they were treasured or feared. Those lucky enough to be born a wizard or witch, or cunning one, as the goblins call theirs, had nothing to fear, except the others of their kind. For without unifying external threats, the rivalry between them stayed much stronger than their fellow wizards living among Muggles ever experienced. Knowledge was power, and power was shared only with family, friends, and trusted allies. With Muggleborns popping up again and again, public schooling developed here too, but the education they offered was generally less than what Hogwarts and other such schools offered, and homeschooling was usually a de facto requirement of becoming a fully trained wizard. Círdan, in particular, had the tradition to help Muggleborns obtain their rightful place as wizards, assuming they lived long enough to prove themselves worthy. Their lives weren't without danger, not even their childhoods. Many times did nubile slaves and their toddlers end up dead, and their owner cursed when his wife discovered the signs of magic in their slaves' offspring, and the wizard couldn't deflect suspicion quick enough. Assuming that apathy from the mistress's part, or good lies, with enough occlumency to beat Veritaserum, or even actual fidelity and innocence from the master's part, enabled the young Muggleborn to reach sufficient age. He was sent into a school where they taught the children some magic, but more importantly reading, writing, general tidbits of culture, and above all, the superiority of wizards. Those Muggleborns who seek to help their slave families were filtered out and disappeared from the country while they were still manageably weak, one way or the other. Most Muggleborns eagerly offered their loyalty to pureblood families in exchange of jobs, arcane knowledge, and eventual marriage to surplus offsprings of the house, and completely turned their back to their Yahoo parents. There was a saying in the plantations, ruthless as an overseer whose mama has a forehead tattoo. Anyway, all that knowledge that made the pureblood families so influential had to be recorded somewhere. Enter the grimoires, books containing all sort of useful informations and advices from crops to animal husbandry, from ancient genealogies to fertility potions, from powerful warding runes to horrible hexes deliberately invented to be hard to copy. These books were the prized treasure of wizard families, guarded, updated, and looked after, cherished as the house's millennia-spanning repository of knowledge. To lose, it was worse than death in the eyes of the Círdan. So, when Melina Nastheros publicly advocated abolition and actually set his slaves free 2 decades ago, the rulers of the island nation stripped him of all ranks and titles, of all lands and holdings, confiscated all his family grimoires, and forced his whole family into exile. Perhaps understandably, the man soon died. Some say shame killed him, others suspect assassination, and his widow didn't linger for long after that. Young Samina was homeschooled in Rocktorattle as long as there was money for that, and ended up being a cunning businessman, but only a mediocre wizard by the standards of his kind. Now, the book returned to him offered new ways to increase his power, and raised other questions. Círdan has changed a lot in the last few months. Slavery was abolished, and the nation didn't just blink out of existence. That alone had probably elicited a chuckling, told ya, from the late Melana in Sheol, and a curious, gotta see it for myself from his son. With the reason of their disgrace re-evaluated, perhaps it was time to restore the ancient family's position in power. And if not, there were still other parts of the family library back there. Chapter 403, Discovery of the Eye of It. Thursday, October 24, 1996, Eastern Mediterranean, sea 200 miles from Egypt. Atlantis DEFCON status. 415% next up. Akio Nirvana. Joanna Gifford whistled and looked at the computer monitor. There's definitely something down there, all right. It's long and almost perfectly straight. That can't be natural. Dr. Albaf, can you come and check this out? The Egyptian archaeologist came over to the screen and checked out the results of a radar scan of the seafloor. The device had been configured, thank you, Wizard Barina, to pick up any signs of wood or within the top 100 feet of the ocean floor. He nodded excitedly when he saw the huge red streak plastered across the screen. That's definitely worth a look, Dr. Gifford. How did you find out about this? The American smiled. We've known about it for a long time. People have always joked they thought it was the keel of the Titanic, albeit in the wrong ocean. Which reminds me, however, are you sure that this is what we're looking for? There are lots of shipwrecks down here. Besides, I would suspect that the people would have reported this anomaly as a shipwreck had it truly been a shipwreck. Albaf nodded. I highly doubt it, Dr. Gifford, for one major reason. As far as we knew, there was no way this could realistically have been a shipwreck. It's far too large for the time period. You've seen a lot of ancient Egyptian vessels in the museums and so forth. If this is indeed a shipwreck, the ship must have been at least the size of the Titanic. That's probably why they called it an anomaly and not a shipwreck. Gifford turned to the man next to her. How far down is she? The technician crunched the numbers. The main anomaly is about 70 feet down or so. However, there appears to be a large field of debris around the target, including several wooden and primitive metal objects. Judging from what I'm seeing, it sure looks like a wreck to me. And a very old one, to boot. Had it not been for the size, we'd have identified her a long time ago. Albaf and Gifford rounded on the technician in unison. How old? Can you estimate a date given the depths of the sediment? The technician turned to look at one of his charts, and his eyes widened. Son of a bitch. That depth corresponds to approximately 4850 plus 100 years old. In other words, 2850 plus 100 BC. All three of them turned to face the bearded man in the back of the room. Well, Wizard Barina, you've been talking with Grand Mugwump Dagher and Ambassador Dialanis. What's the current estimate of the date of the Hammer of Ra impact? Gifford knew what the answer was immediately simply by watching the Czech wizard's reaction. Nevertheless, the mage answered the question in a hushed voice. 2750 plus 75 BC. Intriguingly, there was a solar eclipse in May 2807 which could have been mentioned in some of the flood myths. The four team members looked at each other. Finally, the technician voiced what they were all thinking. Good Lord. The two error bars overlap, and that overlap includes that 2807 date. This has got to be it. I'd say we send down the submersible to check her out. We'll first examine the surface and see if there are any artifacts up there. If there are, we go full bore. Wizard Barina, are you sure that you will not be able to make it so the submersible can transport itself into the seabed? Barina shook his head. In theory, we can transport it into the seabed. However, we won't be able to see much with the sand around. Besides, trolling around for artifacts in the area could jeopardize the safety of the submersible as well as possibly contaminate the site. If this is indeed the wreck of Nohapishtan's lost ship, we have no right to damage her. We'll do drills for now, and if necessary Portkeys to retrieve samples. Gifford turned to Albaf. As the Egyptian representative and the head of the expedition, it was up to him to make the final decision. After all, the expedition had unanimously considered the wreck to be Egyptian property. Albaf drew a deep breath. This is the best lead we've gotten so far, and it wouldn't hurt to take a better look. Send the sub down and have them investigate that big anomaly. The technician shook his head. We can't do that, Dr. Albaf. Remember that the main anomaly is underground. All we have access to are the fragments on the surface. Albaf shrugged. Very well then. Start with the surface and we'll go on from there. The technician nodded, and Gifford picked up the phone to start talking with the team in charge of the submersible 6 hours later. The team crowded around the computer monitor as the automated sub approached the seafloor. The little ship had a camera in front, which was broadcasting a signal up to the surface. For the longest time, the display had just shown an empty water column interrupted here and there by odd-looking fish. The technician called out the altitude from the radar sounder on board the ship. 20 feet, 15 feet, 10 feet. Albaf raised his hand as the seafloor slowly rose into view. Stop at 5 feet. We don't want the engines to start raising a sandstorm down there and making it so we can't see anything. The technician nodded, and the image froze with the camera hovering 5 feet above the bottom. A small, oddly shaped fish, surprised by the intruder, came over to take a closer look. Seeing that the camera was not edible, it swam away. Albaf turned Gifford. How far away are we from the nearest artifact? Gifford looked at her screen. About 8 feet, bearing 175. Albaf nodded and turned to the technician. All right, David, move it over so we're right above the artifact. We'll start numbering the artifacts as we see them. We'll call this one artifact 11 and go from there. The first artifact from this dive site. Got that? Gifford nodded. Yup, artifact 11. The image shifted slowly as it closed in on its target. The team was all pent up with excitement, and they let it all out in an amazed gasp when they saw the object make its way into the field of view. Gifford spoke rapidly. That looks like a piece of wood. How big do you make it? Maybe 2 feet long by 8 inches wide. Albaf hesitated a moment as he converted that to meters. That sounds about right. Take enough pictures to document the sample, and then let the wizard take a look at it. The team spent the next 5 minutes, feverishly, taking pictures of the artifact from all angles. The piece of wood seemed more or less featureless, with the exception of a small hole in the center, where a black object maybe 4 inches across appeared to have penetrated it and gotten stuck in the wooden matrix. Albaf looked at the screen momentarily and frowned. Something doesn't seem right here. Where are all the parasites and stuff? Surely something must have eaten through this object over all these years. I'm starting to wonder if this is a piece of a separate wreck. Do you have something which does carbon-14 dating in there? Gifford shook her head. No, but we do have something like that in the lab. Thanks to the intervention our Czech friend here, we should get a result within half an hour. Albaf bit his lip. He really didn't want to damage the sample, but he didn't have much of a choice here. All right, then. Take tiny pieces of the edge of the artifact and see if we can get a piece of that black thing. The technician frowned. I think the black thing is just a rock, but there should be rocks. He cut himself off when he realized that there weren't any rocks around. The wreck had landed in a sandy area, and the fact that the rock was there was also a bit surprising. Meanwhile, the wizard finished the technician's thought. I don't think it's natural, David. It could be a decoration. It could be a magical stone of some sort, possibly used to prevent marine creatures from damaging the hull. For all we know, it could make the hull waterproof. I agree, Dr. Ablaf. We want to take samples of both if possible. Gingerly working the submersible's robotic arms, Gifford took tiny samples of the 2 regions and stored them in the submersible's hull. She then moved out of the way so that the wizard could cast the duplication charm on the artifact so that the team could study it while leaving the site intact. The submersible began making its way up to the surface, as the artifact's duplicate appeared on the boat. Working quickly, the wizard cast a spell around the copy which would protect it from the air, yet still allow the team to examine it. For the first time in millennia, the artifact could be seen under natural light whose colors had not been attenuated by water. The resulting observations brought virtually everyone into the little control room. The piece of wood had portions of what appeared to be 3 hieroglyphs on it. They had been drawn on in red ink, which had survived in the abyss after all these years. Cameras flashed everywhere as Albaf stared at the copy in amazement. Those are definitely hieroglyphs, and judging from the shapes of the characters, old ones to boot. This is very, very promising. I'm going to want to see the carbon dating results before we claim victory. Gifford whispered the obvious question. What do they say? Albaf shook his head. I can't tell without more context. They seem to be in the middle of a word somewhere. Suffice it to say that we know the wreck is Egyptian, and old Egyptian as well. I would give a good 50% chance at least that we have found the eye of it at last, after 3 months of searching. The team then looked at the copy of the rock, which appeared to have been burned somewhat on the outside. Turning to the wizard, he pointed at the rock. What's the rock for? Is it used in spells at some point? It looks like it's been burned, and it's not charcoal. I haven't seen anything like this before. The wizard shrugged. Neither have I, however. We have a lot of time to look at it. Let's first see what the carbon dating and spectroscopy tests give us on the originals. 5 hours later, the results for the carbon dating test on the wood sample retrieved from the submersible had come back. 4793 plus 85 years. The team burst out in cheers when they heard that. All they had to do now was tell the rest of the world. Noah's Ark had finally been found, one of them at least. However, there was still one more surprise to come. Half an hour later, the results came back on the rock sample which had punctured the wood. Albaf looked at the report in confusion. Iridium. What on earth would wizards do with iridium? Pavel, is there anything about iridium which makes it special to wizards? The wizard shook his head. Not that I know of, Dr. Albaf. Then again, I'm not exactly an authority on. Barina's reply was cut off by a shocked scream from Gifford. Everyone turned to her and saw that her face was white with terror and awe. Albaf turned to her. Dr. Giffords, what's wrong? Gifford could barely speak. I think I know what that rock is. It just occurred to me. Really, please illuminate us. She opened her mouth to continue the explanation when suddenly the computer technician got it as well and turned to stare at the copy of the rock fragment still embedded in the artifact. He turned to Gifford, who nodded. The iridium gives it away. There was a delay of a few seconds, after which both people suddenly began to cry. Albaf threw his hands up in the air. What in Allah's name is going on here? What are you guys all worked up about? We've found the wreck. You should be happy. Gifford wiped her eyes. We've found more than the wreck, Dr. Albaf. You see, iridium is a very rare element on Earth's surface, as most of it is embedded deep in the core. What this usually means is that if a rock has a high concentration of iridium in it, it does not come from Earth. It has an extraterrestrial origin. Albaf suddenly realized where she was going, and his face turned ashen. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Gifford nodded. Indeed. What we have here is a rock of extraterrestrial origin which has punctured a small hole in the deck of the eye of it. This could only mean one possible origin, sir. There was another pregnant pause. Finally, Barina whispered 3 words to himself. Mother of God. Within seconds, virtually every single team member had his or her head bowed in respect for the dead. Sitting before them, embedded in the wood, was a copy of a piece of the object which had caused the largest natural disaster in the history of the human race, one which had caused the extinction of over half of the world's population.